Welcome to this special Indigenous Voices edition of the Salt and Light Hour. I'm Deacon Pedro. Early in 2022, we started Indigenous Voices, a mini-series within the Salt and Light Hour to help us get to listen to Indigenous people. As we speak with them and get to know their personal stories, we begin to learn about their culture, languages, beliefs, traditions, history, and spirituality. This, of course, is in the context of the journey towards healing and reconciliation, which received a huge boost this summer with the visit of Pope Francis to Canada. I have to point out, in case you're new to our show, that I am Catholic. I am an ordained permanent deacon in the Catholic Church, and so I come at this with a particular worldview and with, perhaps, my own baggage. In order to achieve true reconciliation between the Church and Indigenous people, we both have to listen to each other, get to know each other, and each other's traditions and beliefs, share those beliefs with each other, and walk together alongside each other. For now, I'm doing my part. Today, we travel to Alberta, and I am very pleased to share with you two very personal conversations with two people who have become dear friends over the last year, Deborah Lloyd and Gary Gagnon. I'm Deacon Pedro, and welcome to our 5th episode of this Salt and Light Hour special series, Indigenous Voices. Deborah Lloyd is from the Saddle Lake Cree Nation, northeast of Edmonton in southern Alberta. She is an educator specializing in Indigenous culture. She was a teacher for 30 years, but I think I can say that she's been teaching almost for as long as I've been alive, and she is also an expert in the field of addictions. Deborah worked with me on the organizing committee for the papal visit, and I am proud to be able to call her Auntie Debbie.
Hi, I'm Deborah Lloyd, and I have spent most of my life in the field of addiction. I've been sober for almost 47 years, I think it is. And I started my life as an alcoholic young. I didn't drink very long. I was only involved in the whole drinking process for about a year and a half, but I went at it hard and strong, and I knew the path that a lot of my people had been on. So I recognized very early in my drinking that I was headed down the wrong path, and I didn't want that path in my life. So I decided that I would change my life, and I relied a lot on God for that change process. I joined Alcoholics Anonymous and decided that I needed to work exclusively with fellow alcoholics and affecting change in that way. I decided that in order to be effective in any kind of work that I wanted to do, I needed to get more education. So after I'd been sober for a number of years, I went back into university and got a degree in education with a specialization in Indigenous culture, in psychology and social studies.
Okay,
so those are my areas.
Can I interrupt? I'm so sorry to interrupt you and you and I have had this conversation before, Auntie Debbie, and I'm always so you've said a few things. You said that you started drinking at a very young age. You didn't drink for very long, a year and a bit, but you knew right away that this was a problem because you went at it really hard. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you ended up in that situation that you were drinking at such a young age and going at it so hard?
Well, I started drinking when I was about 17. I left home when I was 17 to go and get a job so that I could help my parents. I sent money home all the time, but it was a freedom that I had never, ever had before. And I didn't know how to handle it. I was away from home. I was working at a job, waitressing. I was working from 6 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon. And then I got in with the wrong crowd and started partying after work. And then I found myself that I was, I'd work from 6 until 2, and then I'd go partying at 2:30
for the rest of the
and go to work, party all night, and go to work at 5:30 in the morning. And it was an intense life that I couldn't keep up.
Yeah, and had drinking been part of the family experience, that was a normal thing that made sense to you, or was that
not really, in the sense that my father had sobered up when I was 8 years old. He was an alcoholic.
Okay.
He was an alcoholic, and he sobered up when I was 8 years old. So I really did not see a lot of drinking around home.
But did you grow up hearing that story? Did you grow up hearing about that story about your dad having sobered up?
Or definitely.
Yeah. So definitely. That was part of the culture. So
my dad was in AA. So I heard all the drunkalogs of all his friends.
Yeah.
For many years. So I knew the path and the progression based on the stories of the old alcoholics that would come and visit my dad and help him stay sober. Right. If I went to an AA roundup, or went to got caught in a meeting because there was no babysitter kind of thing, then I was listening to this stuff all the time, right? So right. I knew the path of the alcoholic. So basically, when I started drinking, I was educated, and I knew the progression, so I could see that progressing very quickly for me.
Yeah.
So, and I knew I had this one little auntie who was a really bad alcoholic, and at one point, someone said to me, "Deb, you're getting just like Aunt Martha." And that was a showstopper for me. I did not want to end up like Aunt Martha, who ended up dying in the skids in Vancouver. So that was a wake-up call for me. And I knew that I didn't want that life. So I spent the next probably 5 or 6 months chasing my tail around Canada, trying to get rid of that moniker and trying to tell myself that I didn't have a problem.
Yeah,
we call it a geographical cure in recovery circles. So you're going to go from place to place to place, trying to prove to yourself that you don't have a drinking problem.
Right, and that shows that, and you end up finding that you do have a drinking problem because it doesn't matter where you are, you're still the same person dealing with the same.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And of course, with my Indigenous nature of being, a traveler, going from place to place, and I see that happening a lot even today with a lot of my Indigenous friends. It's easier to pick up and run and go to the next place than it is to face those demons that are telling us that we've got a problem.
Yeah. Auntie, can we just take a little pause and go back a bit? Tell us a little bit about your Indigenous background, where you grew up, what First Nations you belong to, for our listeners to get to know a little bit more about you.
My band is the Saddle Lake Cree Nation, which is north and east of Edmonton. But when my mother married my father, who was not a member of the band, he was Metis. So when she married Dad, she had to leave the reserve. She was no longer welcome on the reserve because that's the way the laws were at that time. But my mother was a residential school survivor. So she really did not want her children to be in the position to be scooped up and taken to residential school. So we did not have anything to do with the reserve. We barely visited the reserve. My parents got jobs in mountain towns where they were working in coal mines and that sort of thing. So that we were not brought up in Indigenous culture. In fact, my mother did everything she could to eliminate Indigenous culture from our lives because she did not want us to be taken away. In fact, I remember many, many times the threat of being taken away was there, and we would, move farther into the mountains, or we would move, but we ended up in a Scandinavian community, which was
really.
Yes, because my father was a war veteran, and they were given the opportunity by the DVA, the Department of Veterans Affairs, to work a piece of land and homestead it and eventually get title to that land. And so the place where he chose was a Scandinavian community. And there were lots of Danish people and Icelandic and
Right.
Dutch and, in that community. So we grew up in that community. We were the only Native family in the school we were in.
Oh, interesting. And just to clarify, so did you say that had you stayed in the reserve or you would have remained having status, that would have meant that you would have had to go to residential school because all status children would have had to go to residential school?
Yeah, during my childhood, yes, that would have
been the case. Okay, so the fact that your mother chose to forego her status when she married your dad,
she used to forego her status.
She didn't have to.
It was taken away.
Okay.
But we still did not live close to that community because there is so much scrutiny. Anywhere there's a reserve, there's scrutiny.
Right.
By the dominant society as to how these children are being brought up.
Okay, so, I see.
So they were very highly scrutinized on things that meant nothing to our culture.
Right.
So
and when
Mom had to protect us by getting us out of those situations.
Right.
That's my thinking now. Based on information back then, we were just following the job wherever Dad was.
Right. And when you were growing up in that Scandinavian community, being the only brown girl in the classroom full of blonde Scandinavians, how was that? Were you treated differently? Did they see you as different, or did you feel like you belonged? No?
Very few children in that community. There were small amounts of discrimination, but it was more bullying than discrimination.
Right. Yeah. More normal children bullying. Yeah. So then you finally at age 18, 19, you decide to go to school, you get a degree in education, specialized.
That would have been nice, but no,
it didn't happen that soon.
That's not how it happened. I went on my little geographical cure,
right?
Metis and hat, and that's where I sobered up. And it was after being sober for a number of years,
okay,
that I decided to go back to university. So I didn't graduate university until I was 38 years old.
Wow! And did you specifically decide, thinking that you would get an education degree so that you could help your people, especially in the area of addictions, or is that something that came later?
It came later. My goal was to get a degree and be employable.
Okay.
That was what I wanted to do. And initially I thought I'd go into social work, but I figured I failed at social drinking, so maybe social work might be the path to go on. And I knew early on that I was an educator, and so I wanted to go into education.
So you were a teacher for how many years?
30 years.
30 years. And
I started working in the school system before I graduated from university. So it was, I guess, 4 or 5 years before that I actually started working in the school system as a teacher assistant, and then carried on.
Right. And then, but eventually you did become a bit of an expert and teacher in specific indigenous culture.
Yes, I went into, I guess you could say, I specialized in Indigenous education. And so I took a lot of courses in university. And as I was taking those courses, I decided that I needed to get more in touch with my culture. I had done some connecting prior to university when I first sobered up. And so it became more important to me as I continued on through my education. It became more important to me that I connect with my culture.
Had you found that it was important to connect with your culture in order to help you sober up?
No, not at all. It wasn't even a thing for me because I had no idea what my culture was.
Okay.
But I just knew I needed to sober up. So as I grew through my sobriety, I met many members of Alcoholics Anonymous that were Indigenous. And those people really, really helped me to connect more with my cultures.
Right. You did say though that your faith helped you a bit. Were you, because you were brought up as a Christian, right?
Yes. Yes.
So where were you with your faith around this time?
My faith has always been a part of my life. Well, the biggest part of my life. My connection with Creator, with God, through the Holy Trinity has always been a huge part of my life. So it contributed to my early sobriety because I knew that I was not walking what we call the Good Red Road.
Mm-hmm.
I learned later that the Good Red Road is the path that we take. Some people call it the straight and narrow. Some people call it following Jesus. Some people call it whatever they want to call it. But for me now, it resonates as following the Good Red Road, so that we know that we are connected with the great Creator of all things. That is the most important thing in our lives, is to connect with Creator. So each day, you start your day with a prayer. You start your day with an understanding of where you stand on that Good Red Road. Am I falling off the side? Am I staying on the path? Am I carrying the message of good hope for the people?
And now, do you see yourself more, I mean, a Christian or an Indigenous spirituality? Do you see that those two are work well together? There's no separation.
There's no separation. It's a Western European concept to cause that separation. It's the difference between linear thought versus circular thought, which is a whole nother conversation.
Yes.
That someday, Pedro, we could go into. But I mean, that is what I teach now. I teach linear thought versus circular thought, and reconciling with the circle, and reconciling with balance in our lives. And those are the most important now.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think you could argue that that concept of circular thought belongs in Christianity as well. It's just that it's not really taught. We don't really understand it the way Indigenous people understand it.
Exactly. To us as Indigenous people, for me as an Indigenous woman, it's inherent. It's something that I was born with but could never recognize. And so I always had that feeling of being set apart. That feeling of anxious apartness is what I feel creates that addiction. So we go right down to the basics and just bore down and get to the basics. And it's that feeling of anxious apartness that begins that whole path of seeking something that will give us that immediate gratification. I found early that immediate gratification rests in the great Creator of all things. So I was very, very fortunate to recognize that at a young
age. Is there something about, because we hear so much about how addictions are such a problem, much more so among First Nations communities. Is there something cultural or maybe even biological that makes Indigenous people more susceptible to the addictions, or is it all just that trauma, the intergenerational trauma that has been passed down?
I think it's a combination of many of those things, and like I say, that your questions are based on a lot on linear thought, because that's the nature of the world today, is to project in that linear construct. So when you look at the question that you just asked me, there are so many parts that you can draw into your circle and put into your circle so that you can process those things in a more gentle, more reconciling fashion. So you take the trauma, you take the cultural piece, you take the education piece, you take the addictions piece, all of those things you have to bring into your circle and allow them to resonate within your heart and help you on that healing path. There's no one thing that is the cause of the addiction. I feel that when we're set into this world of linear thought as Indigenous people, that feeling of anxious apartness is there from a very early age. Because I think about where my problems really were memorable for me. And that's when I began in an education system that was based on linear construct.
Interesting.
So you look at just the very physical structure of a school.
Mm-hmm.
There is not very many examples of circular thought in a square classroom with square desks that are set in rows, that are based on achievement, that are based on competition, that are based on all of these linear constructs. When you look at even how we learn to read, you're reading from left to right. Yeah. You're adding up and down. Everything is a linear construct. So when you go into that process as a circular thinker, you have that anxious apartness. This is why so many of our students end up in special education, because they cannot do the interpretations from circular thought to linear thought when the person that's teaching them is a linear thinker.
Interesting. So as an educator, how quickly did you figure that one out so that you could help your students?
It took me a while. I had to study circular thought. And because I was fairly young in that process, because universities and post-secondary education places were not well versed in the process of Indigenous thought, it was very difficult because I was kind of developing these ideas as I moved along. So I did a lot of work with developing teachers. I did a lot of work with developing governments. I did all through my career. I piped off about how all of this was so important to our people. And now people are starting, like non-Indigenous people, are starting to understand that there are differences in Indigenous ways of learning versus
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we can all benefit from learning in different ways. We're almost out of time, Auntie, and I don't want to leave you without asking you about your summer, this past summer. And I know we don't have a ton of time, but maybe in like, what are the highlights right now that you've had some time to reflect? Auntie Debbie, you worked on helping organize the papal visit. How do you feel now, 3 months later?
3 months later, I feel gifted. I feel like it was such a wonderful gift that was given to me to be able to work on this papal visit, to be able to get right into the meat of things in terms of where the Catholics are sitting on these subjects. And to know that the Holy Father wanted to come here and begin the process, and I emphasize, begin the process of reconciliation from the Catholic Church's perspective. So it was really great for me to see the commitment, not only of the Holy Father, but also of the Catholic people that surrounded him as we went through this walk down this path to begin a process that has only just begun. And now we need to look at, as we termed it, as we're working through it, the Pope is here for 5 days. What are we doing on day 6? So this day 6 stuff is going to last for generations, and we have to be committed to continue working on that. The Pope hasn't called me lately, so I'm not sure that on it.
Well,
but I know that as Catholic people, we are going to continue, because I've had several conversations with them.
Absolutely, yeah, and maybe that shift of thinking from linear to circular needs to permeate in the church as well, so that we can start approaching some of these topics from a different perspective.
We've been so colonized, all of us.
Yeah, it's true, all of us.
The process of colonization is not just an Indigenous concept.
No. No. Auntie Debbie, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time. We could spend so much more time talking to you, and maybe we will bring you back and we can talk about some other things. But thank you so much for all the work that you've done over the last years, I was going to say the last 40 plus years, and for sharing a little bit of it with us today. Thank you. I do hope we can bring Auntie Debbie back to talk to us. It was a gift to be able to work with Deborah Lloyd, and I am proud to be able to call her Auntie. You may have missed a few things during our conversation. The first is that Auntie Debbie is not Catholic. She is a Christian, but not Catholic. You may also have missed what she means by what she calls anxious apartness. I didn't want to interrupt her, but after we stopped recording, we spoke about it a bit more. I can't say that I completely understand the concept of anxious apartness, except that I think that anyone who's experienced a traumatic separation, whether it's divorce or leaving home, refugees, can maybe have a sense of what she means. For Indigenous people, because of colonization, and in particular in Canada because of the residential school system, this is their normal state. And it's in that feeling of anxious apartness where the desire for instant gratification arises, and that leads to addictions. I am also intrigued by what Auntie Debbie said about the difference between our linear thinking and Indigenous circular thought. This is something that I would love to get back to one day, maybe an excuse to bring Auntie Debbie back on the show. Gary Gagnon has a similar story to Auntie Debbie. He is also an educator, although Gary did start out as a social worker. Gary is also in recovery. He comes from a long line of Alberta Métis from St. Albert, just outside of Edmonton. Even though he wasn't in the Papal Visit Planning Committee, he was very much involved in the organization of many of the events.
My name is Gary Gagnon. I'm from St. Albert, Alberta. I identify as a Métis person. I grew up in this little prairie town, which is just north of Edmonton. And it's like a little suburb. But it used to be the capital of Alberta for the Métis at one time. And it was a very old settlement. And I guess you could say, you know, I'm part of an old family that comes from this area here in St. Albert. So that's who I am. That's where I'm located. That's how I identify.
We have spoken to other Métis people in this program before, and I think that our listeners maybe have a little understanding of what that means. But in your words, how would you describe what it means to be Métis?
Well, I think being Métis is to recognize that we're from a very much a European world and very much from an Indigenous world.
Okay.
And I think when those two came together, sometimes, you know, as history would dictate, you know, we were not often accepted as true-blooded Indigenous people, and we were not always accepted as true-blooded Europeans. So, you know, the Métis grew out of that, out of those definitions, and became who they are today, to the point where we are recognized in the Constitution as Indigenous people, with rights and hereditary rights.
Right.
So, you know, but it kind of grew out of the fur trade, as they would say, and whatnot. But, you know, I know who I am here today. I know who I am in front of you.
Yes.
I know my history here. I know my family's history. And I can honestly say that, you know, I was born into an Indigenous family, and I can never change that.
So when you were growing up in St. Albert, did you, like, was it you were Métis, your family is Métis, like that was, you grew up with that cultural heritage?
Yeah, I realized long ago how important that was.
Hmm.
And but often, in a place like St. Albert that has become very much kind of a rich suburb to Edmonton.
Okay.
There's not many of our Métis families left in this area because we just can't afford to stay here. So,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, we were the forgotten people. But as my late grandmother would say, we're forgotten maybe, but we will never forget as
Right.
a family. So,
Right. Um, Tell me a little bit about growing up. Was it a fairly large Métis community, or were you sort of integrated with other non-Indigenous people in St. Albert?
well, I think we were very much integrated with non-Indigenous people. I mean, we couldn't stop them from coming or owning land here to
Mm,
the point, where how it grew today is immense.
mm,
But the thing about saying that is that I guess you growing up here it was to recognize that we were really special people,
okay.
and, and knowing that we were very active in the community. So everything from building the community to Catholic church
Hmm.
gatherings, attending, honoring that. We were very much people that were of the land and and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know, Pedro. It's interesting when you look back and you think,
Yeah, I know.
you know, could things have been different? What would happen if we had maintained all our families here?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I know. I'm just curious to know what it was like growing
But
up. But since you brought it up, so obviously you grew up in a Catholic family. You're Catholic today, and I think that there is a part of the Métis heritage that is Catholic. Tell me a little bit about that.
well, we always knew we were Catholic, but the Métis were strong Catholic in this area.
Hmm.
I mean, we were the first mission. I guess they say west of Red River or Winnipeg area,
Hmm.
way back in the uh, I guess mid 1800s. I think 1844 there was a mission at Lac Saint Anne
Right.
or at Gagnon or God's Lake,
Hmm.
which is just kind of west of here, about 45 minutes. Um, there was an oblate mission there.
Hmm.
And St. Albert had a lot of Métis people, and they were without a priest.
Hmm.
And they went and petitioned at Lac Saint Anne, where there was, families were connected in that settlement to the St. Albert settlement, and we wanted a Catholic priest. So they went and got one, and Father Albert Lacombe
Yeah.
was the one that came. And that was around the time of the rebellion. You got to remember that was just
The
after 1885. I shouldn't say rebellion, maybe
the
the word
the
should be resistance.
the Louis Riel one.
Resistance, yeah, in
Riel.
1885 in
Yeah.
Batoche.
Right.
And we even took up arms here
Oh
and
yeah.
protected. And where they took up arms was to protect the church.
Interesting.
That was a vital heartbeat.
Because
It
that was
was a
part of
prayer.
that. Yeah, so that was integral to the community. It sounds
Yeah.
like you grew up. I mean, obviously you weren't alive during that rebellion, but it sounds like you grew up knowing that history, knowing your heritage, maybe proud even to be Métis and proud Catholic. Um, did you ever struggle with kind of what it meant to be Indigenous as an adolescent or as a young man, and making sort of that make sense? Uh,
Oh my goodness, yes. Because Pedro, of course we're all on a journey of some kind. And I always knew we were indigenous, our
mhm.
family, but being baptized and receiving some of the sacraments early on in life, as like a lot of good Catholic people have gotten,
Mhm.
um, it just felt something was missing, and I couldn't figure it out for the life of me. And I knew we enjoyed being out on the land. We harvest berries. Dad would take us hunting. We just enjoyed that, but not really putting a finger on it and saying, that was very much the spirit of who we were as Indigenous people.
Okay.
Because, we just honored the church, and, but my grandmother had the language, and my mom and dad kind of refused to talk the language. So I kind of lost that language.
Okay. What language did your grandmother speak?
Cree.
Okay, so
We didn't speak the Michif language here.
But she spoke Cree. Okay.
You spoke Cree, or you spoke French, or you knew a little bit of French, or you spoke English. So growing up, there was a part of me that was missing something. And then I got into trouble as a teenager. My road led to an old man that knew my late grandfather. They were in the army together, and my dad took me to him. And I spent time with this elder, and his name was Ed Belrose, and he was from Driftpile First Nations, which is just west of Slave Lake. And it was him that really turned me around. And he said, you have to acknowledge your Indigenous side.
Yeah.
And acknowledge, and he used the word white. He said, acknowledge the white side of you too. He said, go to church if you wish, but also go and learn about your culture, your language.
Yeah.
He said, feel comfortable in that journey. That's going to become part of you. And today I'm at the point where, I'm very much enculturated.
Yeah, you are.
And I so love that.
Yeah.
I don't fight it anymore. I don't need to prove anything to anybody. I know my family doesn't need to prove anything to anybody.
Yeah.
Are who we are, whether we go to church or to an Indigenous ceremony. The underlying thing that my grandparents taught us was just to have a good relationship with God.
Right. So
however we do that, I can't see how it harms us. It can only strengthen us.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I'm kind of at today.
Yeah.
So.
And today you mentioned you're an educator, but how old were you when you decided I'm going to make a difference in the life of other kids?
Well, I had an expulsion from the school district here. I won't tell that story. So I ended up having to go to Edmonton because the school districts around here in St. Albert wouldn't take me.
How old were you
when the expulsion happened?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, about 16.
Like 16, yeah.
But I was already in some trouble.
Okay.
And that's outside of school. And of course, it accumulated one night, and I did something, I regret. And so the expulsion happened, and even my mom was working for the school district at that time, and she was the assistant to the superintendents as an administrator, like a secretary. And I just totally embarrassed her and my family, and I knew I needed help, and that's how I got to that old man when I was about 19 years old. And then he said, you got to do something. So I went and applied for the Army.
Oh.
And I was accepted into officer college, and my marks were good. And so I ended up doing I guess all the requirements, the mission requirements. And the final one I had to go do was a medical, and they found out I had a heart murmur, and I was not accepted because they felt maybe under extreme duress I would faint and I'd jeopardize myself and everybody around me. And so that was kind of a hit. Then I tried for the Edmonton City Police, and same thing. Right away I said I had a heart murmur, and they said, well, I don't know if you want to go further in your application, it's just going to be denied. So of course, there was 2 heartbreaks there because, I always wanted to defend people, and I wanted to do right that way. And so for about a year, I just took any job I could. And I'm in recovery at that time, being 19. And I was
recovery for alcohol?
Just for an addiction.
Okay.
Which, I'm not going to get into it here.
Okay.
But just know that I'm in recovery for the last 37 years. So, but anyway, so I was 19, and I just couldn't, I was just spinning my wheels. And finally, about a year and a half later, I was pretty stable in my recovery as a young person. And I mean, 37 years ago, there wasn't too many people that were in recovery around here that were my age.
Mm-hmm.
And it finally dawned on me, I should just go to university. So I went and talked to the old man, Eddie. And he said, yeah, let's do it. He said, but you don't go to school here in Alberta. You go outside the province. Oh, pardon me. He said, you know too many people here, and you're going to get in trouble. And you're not going to study, and you're not going to, So he drove me to Regina.
Yeah. Wow.
The U of R. We had a road trip together, and for social work, you had to do an interview to get it as a requirement. So I got into the U of R as a social worker, and just kind of went from there, and came back with a piece of paper that said I could do all kinds of little social work things and whatnot. So
those were wise words from that elder. And now it's funny because now I'm not going to say you're old, but now you're the elder.
Thanks.
Now you're the elder giving that kind of advice to young people.
I'm not an elder. People want to say that sometimes, and I just always.
But you are. For a lot of the young people that you work with in schools, you are an elder.
Well, I always tell them I'm just a helper. I think when we met in Cornwall, Ontario, I shared that with you in the sense that, there was a scripture reading from that one night there. It said, it's not so much to be served as to serve.
Yes.
And I've always been of service. I always believe in helping, and I've always paid it forward. For what I got today, I pay it forward.
Yes, you have been.
And I don't want to stop, because
tell us a little bit about the work that you do in the schools in the Edmonton.
Well, I'm very much a person that will infuse the Indigenous culture and our catechesis teachings. So I work in the religious ed classrooms, or with the teachers, especially when it comes to Indigenous spirituality or whatnot. And so I'm a big promoter of that. And so the use of like, for example, sweetgrass in the school, or for our Indigenous students, and then I would compare it to the church and the thurible and the incense that they use, and that the two are very much the same thing. The only thing is about the thurible and the incenser in church, as an example, is that we were never taught that.
Right.
We were never taught what that really was, or why they did what they did. But in regards to our way of blessing ourselves and with the smoke and that, I mean, that was ingrained in us as really young. We saw our people do it, and we understood it. So when we were not explained that in church, there was a bit of a mystery there.
Right.
So when I started to learn about it, then I could teach it. And I could teach the comparisons. So because I work in a Catholic school district, that's kind of like the path I took. But I did break into the school district as a social worker.
Right. Yeah.
So now it kind of morphed into something else.
Yeah. Gary, I don't want to leave you, because we're almost out of time, but I don't want to leave you without talking about the Pope, because I mean, you're in Edmonton, obviously, so you were in the middle of everything, but you were also part of the delegation that traveled to Rome in March, at the end of March, and then you were involved in a lot of the papal visits, events. How are you feeling about that now? It's been 3 months. Have you had a chance to reflect, or are you still a little kind of deer in the headlights? How do you feel now?
Well, there's no deer in the headlights. I think it was an opportunity to tell the Metis story, which was not told through the TRC very much, because
through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yeah, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Truth and Reconciliation Commission, yes. Because in that, there was a federal document, and a lot of the Métis that attended these schools in the province were provincially funded. So there was a little bit said, but not a lot. But I knew that if we went, we could tell that story.
To the Pope,
But
you mean?
to the Pope,
Yes.
to the Holy Father, not knowing, the reward that it would bring us, and that would him come into a very historic Métis site in July, a place that we've been gathering as Indigenous people long before the mission at a very sacred place, which is now called Lac St. Anne, but before it was God's Lake.
Yeah, and you already mentioned that, how important that place was for the Métis people.
Yeah, there was
that were in Alberta way before. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, just going to tell our story was really hard. And, I was a bit of a mess seeing the Holy Father, because I realized who I was in front of.
Mm.
And I realized when that door opened and it was my turn to walk through, I could just feel all the prayers of everyone. And it weakened me, because I just realized that those prayers accumulated to that moment when I went in. Because I did go to a lot of elders in the First Nations community and the Métis elders and ask them for prayers for this trip to be successful. And I felt that. And I wasn't as strong as I thought maybe I would have been. And I could just feel spirit. Yeah. And I was grateful, because I think, the Métis, we did go first, and it was a powerful moment. And we got to tell our story, and we got to share that with the world, that story.
Did you speak with him directly? Did you say anything to the Pope directly?
I kind of did, but I was kind of emotional about it. And, I kind of fumbled. Yeah. I couldn't get my name out to him when I first shook his hand. But, I knew that he listened to us. Mm-hmm. I know he has a good command of the English language. There was only a few times he turned to his interpreter to ask for clarification on a word. Mm-hmm. But in the end, we gave him a gift. We presented a Métis sash stole. Did I say that right?
The stole, yeah. The Métis sash stole, yeah.
And he put it on right away. And then I explained the sash to him, the importance of it. And I kind of grabbed the edges of it like this, and I said to him, when you come to Canada, and if you do, make sure you bring it. And he brought it to Lac St. Anne, and he wore it for us, for all of us to see.
Yeah, and people can watch all that footage and all those photos, and there he is sitting at the shrine of Lac St. Anne, wearing the stole that you gave him. Tell our listeners the symbolism of the sash. The
weave, are, the Métis are many colors, we say, white, we can, many colors, many different communities we come from in the world. So that represents us, those colors. But when woven together, that represents the community. Mm-hmm. The length of it is our nation, they say. One thread can be easily broken, and you can do that. You can take on the fringe of a sash, you can just take one thread and pull it right apart, easy. But the significance of that, when woven together, is that you can't break it. Mm-hmm. So we were to be forever. And, that's why you see that infinity sign has a representation of the Métis as a forever people.
Right. And some of our listeners might not know that is the symbol of the Métis people, the infinity sign. So it looks like an 8, the number 8 on its side, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it symbolizes, that your people, what is the symbol?
Forever people.
Are forever people, yes.
Yeah. And actually, those two circles in the infinity sign represents the two worlds we come from. Mm. So the Indigenous world and the European world. So, but just to go back to meeting the Holy Father, as a Catholic person, I guess there's no greater person that you could meet here on earth is the Holy Father. He is the Vicar General to Jesus. And, that wasn't lost on me, because I grew up knowing, my teachings from the Catholic Church. But as an Indigenous person, knowing that some of my own family were part of the day school situation and whatnot, that was hard to kind of get that story out. it was a little tough.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I mean, we got him here. The Indigenous people, I truly know the Indigenous people, we were the one that brought him here to Canada. He came for us.
Mm-hmm.
And he honored the call to action number 58. And that was to come to Canada, apologize on the land to the Inuit, to the First Nations, and to the Metis. And he did. He took that on his shoulders. He acknowledged a lot. And I think, if you're a person that understands healing, or that you could be on that journey of healing. I mean, there couldn't have been any greater moment to add to your healing than those moments that he had spoke, and places that he attended, and the things that he shared. And Pedro, you were a great part of that as well, and you had the inside workings too, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And, we only had 4 months to try and get this thing off the ground.
Yeah.
Where other people have 2 years to get it going.
Yes.
So, that was quite a huge task, undertaking.
Yeah. And we did it. Well, we did it together.
Did it. And we made good friendships through that.
We did.
Met a lot of nice people.
Yes.
And a lot of nice non-Indigenous people that were really walking with us.
Yeah.
And I do want to mention that, because reconciliation is about, honoring the hand that is outstretched to you, and you outstretch your hands to greet that hand.
Yeah, exactly. It goes
when
together.
You shake hands, those two hands are together, right in that connection. The old people will say that's where good intent resides. Good intent is the coming of two hands.
Mm-hmm.
Good intentions, trust, caring, love. All those values are into that friendship at that point.
I think, had the Pope not come, we wouldn't be friends. So thank the Pope.
Well, I do thank the Pope. I thank him because he came to Lac St. Anne. We also got the upgrades that we needed for that place as well.
And he got to wear your sash.
And he got to wear the sash that Audrey Patras,
yes,
the leader of the Métis Nation of Alberta, just a great leader, a wonderful woman. And, we got that made, and he honored that, and he honored us as Métis people.
Yes.
And when I saw that he was putting that on, I just cried. I thought he didn't forget.
No, he didn't. Gary, thank you for sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do with us today. Speaking with Gary is also an inspiration. I have enjoyed working with him and getting to know him, and I'm glad that I can call him a friend. What he said about friendships at the end is so important. I don't think of us as walking together. We don't think that we have to make a point of listening to each other. We just call each other friends, and we are friends. This is likely the one thing that I have learned from being with Gary. Instead of making such an effort to walk together with Indigenous people, why don't we just be friends with them? Both Gary and Auntie Debbie have had a long and hard road of discovery and healing. They could have both taken different roads, but they didn't. Perhaps there's a little bit of God's grace in there. Instead, they are walking what Auntie Debbie calls the good red road, and are living lives of wholeness and maybe even holiness. They have both influenced and been an inspiration to many young people, and I can say that I can count myself among those whom they have influenced and inspired. To learn more about all Indigenous issues, especially as they intersect with the Catholic Church, and for resources, you can visit our website, slmedia.org/healing. To listen to all our Salt and Light Hour programs, and especially to other Indigenous Voices episodes, visit us at slmedia.org/podcast. And to watch all the events of the Papal Visit to Canada and to read the Holy Father's addresses, go to slmedia.org/Pope in Canada. I'm Deacon Pedro. Thank you for listening to this special Indigenous Voices edition of the Salt and Light Hour.